Every business wants good employees. They're an asset to every single business. The longer you can employ someone, the better they are at their job, the more of an asset they are to the business. But sometimes at sale time, that very employee who was an asset to your business can turn out to be the single biggest problem in the business sale. So this is a true story. It's the story of how a staff member, an employee who was the single biggest asset of the business, actually cost the owner the sale. Moreover, it cost the owner the sale, but it also cost a large chunk of change off the price of the business. How did they do that? Let's find out, shall we? So I've been a broker for 20 odd years. I've sold hundreds of businesses. Most of the time, they work perfectly. But this is a case where they didn't go as well as it should be. And why? Because of the staff member that was involved. So the employee-employer relationship, it's a symbiotic relationship. The employer expects a fair day's work and the employee expects a fair wage for a fair day's work, and that's fine. And when the business sells, most employers, most sellers of a business, they want to do right by their staff. They want their employees to be taken on by the new owners of the business, and they want them to carry on giving good service, getting a good day's wage, and generally enjoying good employment that they enjoyed under the seller. But it doesn't always work like that. So just a comment here, this is not a video about the legal process or what legally you're required to do when it comes to a sale. I will do a video on that in a later date. Moreover, it's a cautionary tale about how employees react to the sale, or how some employees react. So let's talk about my first example. Now, my first example was a manufacturing business, and the seller of the business had employed a lady to run the business. I won't use names, I don't think that's fair. And she'd employed her to run the business with the owner's help. So the two of them worked side by side. And it was a very successful partnership, probably for close to about 8 years' time. Now, the owner of the business decided that because she was such a loyal employee, she would bring her into the sale. And she decided to tell her that she was going to sell the business and explain to her she was ready to retire, which was no surprise. She was getting on a bit. And so she wanted to retire, and she said she was looking to hand the business over to someone a little bit younger, a little bit more enthusiastic, but someone who could drive the business pretty much onwards and upwards. So when the seller met prospective buyers, she would tell them how great her manager was, her general manager was, her personal assistant, whatever you want to phrase the staff member was. And she would say how great this woman was and how she couldn't run the business without her, and she was just perfect for the business, and they needed to take her on and they needed to keep her happy because all the customers knew her. She was the cornerstone of the business. Staff loved her. Well, you get the idea. So they had to take her on. Now the buyers, that was great. They thought that was excellent. That's exactly what they were looking for. They were looking for a business that had good existing employees, good existing staff who could run the business with them. But there was a problem. The process of selling a business, it isn't a quick process. Now, sometimes it can take 3 to 6 months to find a buyer, establish terms, go through the process, and end up actually selling the business. That's pretty normal, and that's what sellers and buyers expect the process to do. But for the staff member, it created a huge amount of uncertainty in her mind. Uncertainty about the future of the business and about her future in the business. What was going to happen? Who was going to buy it? What did they look like? What was their attitudes? Was she going to be employed? And how would that whole thing pan out for her? And it's not an unreasonable worry for an employee, a staff member to have. The seller was very keen for the buyers to employ her general manager, her friend by now. She'd worked with her for so long. So she introduced them when they were looking at the business, and they got them talking, and everybody seemed quite happy. And the buyers were going, yes, we want to employ her. The employee was going, sounds good, they're great. I think they'll do well for the business. And so everybody was happy. So we went off and started the process in earnest. If you have ever bought and sold a business, you would know that it's not an overnight operation. So we started the process. The first job was to get a sale and purchase contract sorted. So we got the lawyers involved. We drafted up a sale and purchase contract. We negotiated the price. We negotiated the terms and conditions. The buyers then needed to go and get finance from the bank. They needed to perform a due diligence on the business. They needed to get their accountant to talk to the seller's accountant. They then needed to get the landlord to approve them as tenants. Now, all of this took time. Now, we allowed 4 to 5 weeks for them to do all of that, and that again is not an unreasonable expectation. But during that time, the employee started to worry. She was worried about what was happening. Now, the owner kept her up to date with what was going on in the process, but the longer it took, the more she worried about her future, the more she worried about the uncertainty. She was a mum, she had kids, she had a family, so she had responsibilities and obviously needed a wage. She wouldn't be working if she didn't need a wage or didn't need an income. So she was concerned that all this was going to go on and she would be left in the lurch, left without a job, left high and dry, if you like. The employers would change their mind, or the buyers would change their mind, and she'd be in trouble. So what did she do? Well, she did what anybody in that situation would do. She looked around for another job. Now, she was very skilled, very respected in the industry, so it was no problem for her to find another job. Now, as it happened, the job she found was pretty much doing the same thing, but directly for the opposition. So the opposition, competition, whatever you want to call it, they were making the same product, same industry, same clients, same customers, mostly the same suppliers. So they were in direct competition, and they were very, very keen to get their hands on this employee, as you would think so. I mean, wouldn't you? So she got the job and she handed in her notice. But her timing couldn't have been worse. She handed in her notice on the last day for satisfaction of the final clauses in the sale and purchase agreement. So the buyer ticked off everything. They'd done their due diligence, got landlord's consent, got their finance, everything was ready to go, and they were ready to declare the contract unconditional, and the employee handed in her notice to the owner. Now, as you're aware, the owner has to declare a fundamental change in the business, and having your main employee hand in their notice is definitely a fundamental change to the business. So the buyer did, well, exactly what you would expect the buyer to do. The buyer cancelled the contract. And they could do that under their due diligence clause, simply saying that the business failed its due diligence. So what happened? We ended up with the sale falling through, and the seller was back to square one. We had to find another buyer. But not only was she back to square one, but she didn't have her prime staff member, her main staff member, helping her run the business. So not only did we not have a sale, but she didn't have a staff member either. Worse still, that staff member is going directly to the opposition. So in hindsight, it probably wasn't the best idea to bring the employee into the negotiations, into the process at such an early time. Sure, we could have brought her in later, and the purchasers appreciated getting to know the employee, and that went a long way to making them want to buy the business. But equally, that understanding of the employee and that desire to buy the business, well, that was tempered by the fact that as soon as that employee left, they thought that a lot of the IP, a lot of the knowledge in the business was leaving with that employee. And of course, that was never going to work, was it? So again, the contract failed. So what happened? Well, yes, the business did finally sell, not to those same buyers. We found another lot of buyers, but it took another 3 months to find those buyers, and it was sold at a reduced price. Simply speaking, had that employee stayed on, it added value to the business. But having that employee gone, having that intellectual property, that business brains, if you like, within the business no longer there, and worse still, working for the opposition, meant that it took longer to sell. And we sold it at a reduced price. So the net result was poor old owner of the business, longer to sell the business, and got less for the business at sale time. But that's not the worst story I've ever seen. How about the employee that actually cost the owner $100,000? Yep, $100,000 in cold hard cash. Have a look at that video up there. You're not going to believe that story. I'll see you over there. Thanks for watching. Cheerio.